Well, hello and welcome back. It is time to discuss Article 2 and 3 of the Constitution. So, potentially you just watched, I don't know, 18-minute video on the Article 1 of the Constitution. Apologies for the length on that one. Articles 2 and 3, the President and the Judiciary, are much shorter as they are designed to have fewer moving parts and less power. Interestingly, this will be relevant later on, but I'll throw it out now. You can think of our government, the power of the branch, because we have three branches, right? The power of the branch of government has a relationship to the people commensurate to the power. The legislature is the most powerful. It is the most democratic branch, most closely connected to the people. The executive, the second most powerful branch, still one person, very powerful, but not as powerful as the legislature by design. And they are removed one step from the people because of the Electoral College by design. Then the third most powerful branch, the judiciary, in fact, its most powerful tool in its toolbox is judicial review. Isn't even in the Constitution. It came from the Marbury v. Madison case. In either case, the judiciary, the weakest of the three branches, is also the furthest removed from the people. And we'll get to that in a minute, but it's worth considering. So, the executive power shall be vested in a president, hold their office during a term of 4 years, and together with a vice president chosen for the same term, right? So presidents serve for a term of 4 years. We all know that pretty well. That wasn't always the case. And we'll talk about that in amendments video to follow. So they serve for a term of 4 years. They must be 35 years of age. And previously, right, members of Congress, 7 years a citizen, 25 years old. Members of the Senate, 9 years a citizen, 30 years old. President, 5 years old, but you must be a natural born citizen after the beginning of the country, when no one was a natural born citizen because they were creating it as they were adults. So for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger cannot become president. Ilhan Omar could not become president. You have to be born an American citizen, and that seems like it should make somewhat obvious sense. We can trust you as a foreign-born resident to take care of the needs and interests of your local community or even your state as a senator. But when it comes to being the leader of the country, dealing with foreign nations, friends and foes, we need someone who's been here their whole life. That seems quite appropriate. And so those are a couple limitations up front. President gets paid out of the Treasury like everyone does, and their payments go up over time. But whenever there's an increase in payment, it doesn't kick in until the next re-election cycle, and that happens for all of the elected officials and the Supreme Court as well. The president is the commander-in-chief of the Navy, the Armed Forces, Air Force, and all other military, the entire military, right? Whatever branches exist currently are under the purview of the United States president. And potentially this says militia here, which we don't really have militias anymore because we have National Guard at the state level, and various police forces at all levels of government. Those can all be activated by the president for a particular purpose. They'll have the power to grant reprieves, pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And this one is somewhat debated. Is it good that the president has the ability to just forgive someone of their crimes? Potentially, depends on how they were used. I believe if it's not already happened, I suppose that anybody involved in, for example, January 6th has been absolved of their crimes by the president. Certainly, President Biden gave blanket pardons to a whole host of people that we weren't even sure did something wrong. Certainly, he gave his son a pardon, which he said he wouldn't, and I wouldn't. If I were him, I would have just said, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But the fact is, any parent, right, if they have the ability to keep their child out of prison, would do so. So, no shade there. There are a lot of people in death row, that might be wrongly accused. Maybe pardon some of those guys. President shall have the power by and with the consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators concur, can nominate by and with the advice and consent of the Senate ambassadors, public ministers, consuls, and judges of the Supreme Court. This is important. How does the Supreme Court justice get to their position? Well, they've got to be someone who's very, steeped in the law. They're judges, they're lawyers already. And then they are nominated, they're put, basically, the president has a pool of individuals to draw from. They might be politically and ideologically aligned, there might be favorites, who knows what, right? It's not like this completely uncorrupt system, but the people that are there are usually very qualified. From that list of individuals, the president chooses someone who they think is likely to get through the confirmation process, which happens in the Senate. President nominates, Senate confirms, and then the Supreme Court justice is there for life. They may change that in the future, but currently that is the law of the land. The president, vice president, and all officers shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, which is giving comfort or aid to our enemies or fighting against us actively, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. That's it. The president controls the military. They are the face of the country. They negotiate with all of our adversaries and foes. They make the deals. And then they go back to the Senate, sometimes the House and the Senate, and they say, hey, this is what I want to do in this particular situation. This president tries to persuade the legislature that it is the right call. And as you can see in that portion I just read, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate when it comes to treaties and ambassadors, and a whole host of other things found in that little section. Keep that in mind. That's it. The presidential section is actually quite short. The structure of the executive branch has grown massively in my lifetime. Really, though, it effectively started, and we'll read an article down the road by Ron Pestrito on the birth of the administrative state, where the progressive era, not the modern progressive that you all think and know of, either you are aware of them or you think you are one, but the progressives we're talking about are the progressives of the late early 1900s, and they wanted to reform the structure and the intent of the government. They weren't so much focused on what we think of now. We think of like progressive social issues. Not really the same thing. There's some overlap. There is some connective tissue across time. But the progressives of the early era wanted to massively expand the role of the executive and administrative function. Yeah, and we'll get there. We'll get there in a few weeks. Now, on to the Supreme Court, and this one is even shorter. Judicial power shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in any inferior courts created by the Congress, right? As we said just previously in that previous video. Judges of the Supreme Court shall hold their offices during good behavior, which means they could potentially be impeached or thrown out. I don't know if maybe one has in the past. It's very rare. And shall at stated times receive payment, right, for their services, which shall not be diminished during their time in office. And I'm not sure how it works where they'll get pay increases if that happens over the course of their life, or if once they're in, it's like, this is all the pay you get, because I'm not 100% sure, but nor is it terribly relevant. Then there's the other section here is, what is the Supreme Court's role? There's this thing called original jurisdiction. It just basically means if a court has original jurisdiction, they're the first court that you come to for this type of discussion. And so for issues of constitution, Supreme Court, it has original jurisdiction oftentimes. But it's also the court of final appeal. So you might have a case that takes place in Omaha or Bellevue or wherever you live, and then it'll go through the city, maybe district courts, the county courts, or maybe up to the state court. Then it might go up to the state Supreme Court. It might go up to the district court, and then finally potentially up to the Supreme Court. So it's just, you keep appealing up the ladder. And the Supreme Court does have the ability to say, we will not hear this case. Right? They might choose to, and they might choose not to. It's within their purview. There's not a lot here, to be honest. Section 3, just right, it talks about what treason is, because we should know what treason is. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, the states, us, or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Those are things that are treasonous. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. The Congress shall have the power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood. Your kids don't get punished if you are treasonous, or forfeiture except during the life of the person attained. So they can take all of your stuff and punish you, but your lineage will not suffer as a result. And those are the first 3 articles of the Constitution. Obviously, that first video was nearly 18 minutes. This one is much shorter. I mentioned previously the Marbury v. Madison case. You don't need to understand all the ins and outs. There was a changing of the guard in the presidency, and there were a handful of positions that the outgoing president was trying to finish off the night before they were out of office. And so the next morning, the new administration comes in and they have all these documents and they don't deliver them. And so this guy knows he's supposed to be getting a commission for a position, and he sues the government saying, you have to give me that. And they're like, no, we don't. I don't actually remember how it was decided, and it kind of doesn't matter. The point is, the judge deciding the case created for the court a new power called judicial review, which gives the Supreme Court the ability to tell presidents and to tell the legislature, the Senate and the House, what you're doing is unconstitutional. It's very powerful. It's got its limits, obviously, but it greatly expands the power of the Supreme Court. One example that I can think, well, a couple examples. So one is student debt is a huge issue, right? In the last couple of elections, it was a prominent talking point. And so during Biden's 4 years, he wanted to do something to ease the burden on all these people paying student loans. I get it, I have student loans. And so he just wanted to forgive student loans for basically people below a certain income bracket. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. You don't have the power to do that. Power of the purse strings, right? Money owed to the federal government, that's the legislature's responsibility. So you as the president do not have the constitutional power to forgive debt. And so they said, no, done, stop. And Biden, desisted, and he sought to remedy that student loan issue through other means. And so if any of you happen to have student loans, you go to your student loan servicer online, and you'll probably see regular updates about the SAVE Act or the SAVE Plan or these various things the government's trying to do. And the Supreme Court is kind of putting these halts on them, saying you can't do that. That's outside of your purview. Those are things. More recently, right, just over a year ago, there was Liberation Day or something. President Trump called it. It was like May 5th or 6th, I think, where he imposed or threatened to impose massive tariffs across hundreds of countries, friend and foe alike. And it was terribly disruptive. We could have a longer discussion about that another time, but the point is, why or how was the president able to do this in the first place? Well, back in the 1970s, Congress gave up some of its power to the president to say, in emergency circumstances, the executive will have the authority to impose certain tariffs. And so Trump said, cool, I think it's an emergency, tariffs for everyone. And it took a while, but the Supreme Court, or possibly lower courts, decided, I think probably appropriately, you misused that power. It was not exactly an emergency. You don't have the ability to tariff the world, and certainly not under the circumstances that you claim to be an emergency. So these are ways in which the Supreme Court can play a role in halting the activities of the other 2 branches. There you go. Okay. That should be enough information to assist you in the Constitution quiz that you have. And then there will be more videos coming where I talk in a bit more detail about the amendments. which are more interesting, I think. And certainly the Bill of Rights is a very fascinating one. So talk soon.